The SciComm Collective acknowledges the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the lands we study, write and record on, and their sovereignty was never ceded. Hello and welcome to the SciComm Collective.
Different useful knowledge in different areas.
The joy is sharing it, making science accessible, the ignored final step of the scientific method. Every different perspective.
Science is culture.
The SciComm Collective brings science and science communication to you.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SciComm Collective. My name is Kate and I'm joined here by Jarita Holbrook. Jarita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jarita Holbrook. What would you like to know about me? Because I do science communication, but not professionally.
Yes.
Right. So I do films, I do YouTube video series, and I talk at public events. But, being a professional science communicator is something different from that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to hear about my strategies for, doing this work and why I'm doing this work or.
Yeah. So Jarita works in cultural astronomy and I had the pleasure of attending a workshop run by Jarita on Tuesday. And what I found particularly interesting is in your line of work, you introduce yourself differently depending on who you're talking to. And I was hoping we could actually role play this a little bit because you can introduce yourself as you would to, say, a Western astronomer and then potentially someone.
Indigenous knowledge.
Yeah, an Indigenous.
Yeah, so that was the exercise that we did. And whenever I do that, people love that exercise. And, thank you for volunteering to be the Indigenous person.
That was terrifying because I said from the get-go at that workshop that I am a white Australian woman and it felt deeply uncomfortable to be volunteering, but at the same time,
there was no one else. Yeah, no one else was doing it. Yeah. Okay, so I will start. So what she's referring to is that I have to interview all kinds of people, but my two main populations that I interview are astrophysicists for historical oral histories or Indigenous knowledge holders to have discussions about their sky knowledge and how they use the sky in their everyday lives. And so when I go into those two different communities, I have to introduce myself differently. So for example, I'll do an example first. Okay, so if I'm talking to an astrophysicist who I know is a PhD astrophysicist who's never met me before, I say, hello, I'm Dr. Jarita Holbrook. Like you, I have a PhD in astrophysics. I studied star formation in using infrared arrays for my PhD, which I got in the last century and at University of California, Santa Cruz. And I am the oral historian for the American Astronomical Society. And thank you for volunteering to be interviewed today. Boom. Right?
Perfect.
So then if it's an Indigenous knowledge holder, this is the way I introduce myself. Hello, I'm Jarita Holbrook. I'm descended from African slaves in the United States. The original plantation was in North Carolina, which is where the Cherokee people are. So I'm also part Cherokee. And then the last plantation was in northern Mississippi, which is where the Choctaw people are. So I'm also part Choctaw. So I have this blend of both African American and Native American, yet I'm also descended from the slaveholders. And that's why I hold the name Holbrook, because that is my slave name. That's how I introduce myself.
And thank you for doing both ways because I think it just hits as to the importance of knowing your audience, which is such an important part of science communication. One of the key points of the workshop that I was lucky enough to attend on Tuesday was talking about Indigenous knowledges and the mutual benefits of both parties participating in scientific endeavor.
I think it's a really important point. So people may or may not have heard of the CARE principle, which I'm a co-author on the CARE principle, which is the CARE principle for Indigenous data governance. So the C stands for collective benefits. The A stands for authority to control. The R stands for responsibility. And the E stands for ethics, right? And so the C is what you're referring to, which is the collective benefits. And that has to be established, that we are doing a two-way thing, right? We're both benefiting from this right now. And we set this up ahead of time. So you want to get something out of it. I want to get something out of it, right? And so that's establishing before we even did the interview. And that's how your research should be in Indigenous communities. That before you start doing research, you should do your introduction and you could ask them, I'm this type of researcher and I would like to co-create or do research or something in your community around these issues. And I was wondering if there's something that you would get out of me being here or something you want me to do or something, right? Before we even start doing the data collection or interviews or anything. So I think that's really important. It's a little bit scary for scholars to do that, for researchers, because you never know what they're going to ask for, right? And you hope that it's something that you can actually deliver. So, and community by community, they have different things that they want. If you remember also in the workshop, I said, go where you're invited.
Absolutely.
And so for me, it's been fairly easy. What the Indigenous people wanted was they wanted their people to be part of my international study, right? They wanted to be put on the map, so to speak, this intellectual map. Nobody had done this kind of study in their community. And so they just wanted to be part of that. So that was pretty easy, but it was a lot of work because where they sent me was very remote. Then you're stuck there until the next boat comes back. And, but they was very welcoming, lovely people, etc.
So who would you normally collaborate with? So what's some of the research and studies that you've done with Indigenous knowledges?
So normally, the type of collaboration that I've had in the past is where, like I said, they just want me to go and study them, but they will provide me with free housing, right? And they will provide me with translators, right? And so my collaborators are those translators. And, and at the beginning of the day, I would say, are there people that are like this that I can go and talk to? And they would arrange for people and we would then go and talk to them. So really my translator would be the person who was equivalent of a research assistant. And my translator in one community was very high status. So he wasn't the chief, but he was one or two down from the chief. So, it was nice to have someone who had that high status, who could make things happen. And also, you never know who you're going to get in terms of their status, because I'm a native English speaker. So I need someone with a good command of English to help me do all these things. Whereas in North Africa, I hired translators. So the translators that came with me were from the US, but they were not native French speakers, but they were fluent French speakers. And that made it harder when I was in the community and moving around because they were not from the community. But we were able to connect with, because we were all women, we were able to connect with some women in the community who then helped us, right? And we had children, right? So going into the field with women as women and having children is really a great way to make contacts in a community, is to go with children. So one of my mentees right now, who is a guy, is potentially going to go and do field work, and he's got a toddler. And he's like, well, what happens with the toddler? And my family's in New York. I'm like, you take the toddler with you. And it was like, what? I'm like, no, you take that toddler with you. The whole community will embrace you because you are a man by yourself with your toddler. Believe me, this is a formula that's just going to work. He's still skeptical, but I hope he does it. I hope he does it.
We'll come out the other side and say, Jarita, you were right.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Going back to your question about how differently you would introduce yourself to the different collaborators you have, could I please ask, how did you come up with it? Was there some sort of, when you were just giving, I feel like at some point you just start off with giving your authentic introduction in one way and then you realized, was it some sort of prejudice that you faced, or did you feel like people sort of maybe had a different response to you?
Well, it's hard to pinpoint when I learned to do this because I've always been moving through Indigenous communities because I had Native American teachers and we would go to powwows and we'd go to sweat lodges. And these are all Native American events. And you would have to introduce yourself in that context. So pretty early on, I had to figure out who were my Indigenous people that were in my history and when I'm moving in Indigenous cultures, I have to tell them, what is my Indigenous bloodline? In addition to Africa, my Native American bloodlines. And you have to listen to the way that they introduce themselves, right? And then you try to mimic the same way. And if you leave something out that other people think would be relevant, they will then say, and Jarita is also a professor at, University of Edinburgh or so it's not that I'm hiding it, but I'm just trying to be culturally appropriate in the moment, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, on that topic, essentially, of identity and how much that plays into your academic life.
Yes.
And
multiple identities.
Yeah. And how that identity impacts the way that you conduct research.
Yes. So sometimes to be Dr. Jarita Holbrook, astrophysicist, cultural astronomer, is you're dead in the water. And when you're trying to interview someone, they're just tongue-tied. They're just like, it's just too big. It's too much. And so that's where I have to decide how much I'm going to disclose, right? Like everything I'm saying is true, but maybe I won't emphasize that I went to the best schools in the United States, or maybe I'll emphasize more of my parents' or my grandparents' story, which may build more rapport, right? So we usually start when we're having just ethnographic interviews. We often start with talking about our grandparents, right? And so maybe I will talk about part of my family, but my grandparents were on one side were professors. So that's also quite intimidating. So maybe I'll talk about the side of my grandparents that were not professors, right? To just get them to relax. And yeah. So yes, having multiple identities is useful. Mm-hmm. Because I have a connection with probably everyone here. You're Australian by your accent, but where are you from?
So my dad's side of the family is from Malaysia, and my mom's side of the family is from Indonesia, but they're both of Chinese descent. Mm-hmm. Yeah. My parents went here for university, basically, but we just moved here to relocate permanently about 4 years ago. I was decided for Yeah.
Yes. I love Indonesia. See, I have a connection with almost everybody, right? I love Indonesia. And the first time I went to Indonesia was 1992. And then the next time I went was 1994 or 5. I wintered over in Indonesia. And I know people hate Jakarta. I thought it was fascinating, but I'm from Los Angeles, the other place with lots of traffic, right? And also the mix of Islam and Hinduism, which I think is really interesting. But of course, Bali was our favorite location, being in a part of a Hindu family, right? But not where you would expect. I loved Mount Batur. So, and the Mount Batur community really welcomed us in a way that, we were embedded in that. It was like, we were like family. And I don't know how we pulled that off, but it was just wonderful being in Mount Batur and with those people. Though I haven't been there since, 95, essentially. Yeah, it is totally time for another. Yeah. And I bet Bali is so different from, what I went through. It's always changing and morphing. So
I find your ability to shapeshift fascinating. And I was wondering if you could comment about whiteness theory, which I know we were talking about the other.
Right. We were. And so when you're particularly talking about African Americans or my fellow partially Indigenous, partially not, code switching is a term that you use, code switching.
Yeah, kind of code switching instead of shifting, but
code switching. So, I'm this way in this situation and that way in another situation, and I can fluidly go back and forth. But it has a lot to do with this. I'll get to whiteness, but it has a lot to do with being from a slave family, right? So this is the history of the United States of being a slave, that you had the name that your family gave you, and you had your outside name, the name that the slave people gave you. And so the people who loved you called you one name, and the people who were outsiders called you a different name, which, is carried through with African American families even today, that they'll have two names. They'll have a nickname and they'll have their real name, right? So I didn't know that I was Jarita until I went to school, right? And I'm not telling you what my nickname is. So it's like an inside name. And so this duality is kind of built into our culture. It was a way that we were able to survive slavery and Jim Crow and possibly the new fascist regime, right? It's like, I shouldn't talk about Trump.
we're living in a very interesting moment right now.
Yeah,
all yards of our podcast,
right?
Future,
and so what I think is also odd but interesting is, I have friends that I've been friends with for like 30 or 40 years, and they can still find out new things about me, and they'll still say, "I never knew." Da, 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 da. And it's like, well, why the hell would I tell you that? Did you need to know that? And they think they know so much about me. And it's like, no, you really don't know, because I'm always code switching. There's always a part of me that you're never going to know. And that's fine. Now, being from California, where everyone's like, I'm on my journey and I must be authentic and I must be myself. And it's like, yeah, I went through that and it failed. So I'm like, I'm done being my authentic self in all situations. It just doesn't work. So I just shift to the moment. I shift to the moment and be as authentic as I can be in that situation. But know that there's things that I'm always holding back, right? So for example, I am a published Afrofuturist writer under a pen name, which I will not disclose the pen name. There's things that you just have to keep to yourself, right?
And that's important.
Yeah, and it's important for survival. Okay, so that's code switching. And then whiteness. So code switching is not my theory. Whiteness is not my theory. Whiteness and the performance of whiteness and whiteness as property. So for example, I'm not going to ask you, but I'll talk to our two non-white people, that how does it, when you're dealing with someone who is white, right? And then you say something like, oh, well, it's you can just say that your grandfather is Indian. And how do they respond to that? Like, then you really see whiteness. And he said, oh, in that situation, you could just say your grandfather is Indian. What? And then you can see whiteness right there. They're horrified at the thought that they have an Indian in their past, right? Or an Indonesian or a Malaysian in their past, right? Then you really see the play out of whiteness, no matter how liberal. It's like, oh, how liberal are you? Were you willing to say that your grandfather was Black? No, of course not. Especially if we're having like one of those hair discussions, right? Like they have curly hair. And I'm like, well, you need to, the thing about white people is they're always trying to take the oil out of their hair. And Black people are trying to put oil in their hair, right, in order to make it stronger. And I said, well, you really need to go to a Black hairdresser or go to a Black hair shop and get some Black hair products. And they're like, but I can't do that. I'm like, just say your grandfather was Black. Oh, no, I can't do that, right? That's when you really see how attached they are to their whiteness, right? And they know the value of whiteness, that they will get more goodies and life is easier, et cetera, by being white in the white world. But they don't want to acknowledge is that it's unearned, right? They did nothing to earn all that privilege. They just rocked up white. All they had to do was be born white, and they're given the benefit of the doubt. They are eligible for certain programs without questions asked, right? They have earned nothing. All they have is white skin, right? So that is whiteness theory, right? That it's unearned privilege that white people do not want to acknowledge, that they don't deserve it. They haven't earned it. They think that they have earned it, but it's very fragile at the same time, right? So it's madness. Whiteness is like madness. But my theory is every brown person but your own, right? Every brown or black person but your own, right? So it's part of whiteness, right? So when you're moving in white world, right, that your local white people would rather import people of color from other places than actually engage with the local diverse communities.
And this is where I could potentially speak to that, in that I've grown up as a white Australian in rural Western Australia and trying to reconcile the history that this country has with its own Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And as I say, we would much rather engage. Do we want to reconcile our own history? No, up for debate. But if anything, like the referendum of 2023 showed us, we've got a long, long way to go.
Yes.
So,
yeah. And so why do they not want to engage with their local communities of color? I don't know. I can only hypothesize. And what I hypothesize is that if they do engage with their local communities of color, they have to acknowledge that they stole the land. Again, that they have not earned this legitimately, right? That they have stolen the land, they have enslaved people, they have killed people, they've murdered people, and that they've taken resources and opportunities away from people today and in the past, and that they don't want to think of themselves as the bad guys when they are clearly the bad guys. But they're not the only bad guys. They shouldn't feel bad. They're keeping good company with a lot of bad guys. They should still try to deal with this and engage with the local population. They can't keep importing diversity. So since I'm of African descent, I'm only going to talk about being Black, African descent. Other people of African descent, we all know the game. We absolutely know the game. So it's like in America, if I am of African descent but not African American, I'm more likely to get a position. In the United Kingdom, I'm African American and not Black British. I'm more likely to get a position. Here, I'm more likely to get a position over an Indigenous Aboriginal person, right? So you swap your Black people. As academics, we have to go where we can actually work and be paid. So I'm an expat. I live in Scotland, more likely to get resources and things that I need in Scotland than in America, right? And this was also true in South Africa. People forget that South Africa, much of academia is white. And so you have the same performance of whiteness again, where they will take Black people from even other parts of Africa other than South African Black people. And me as an American, a Black American who went to the best school, I deserve to get those jobs because I went to the best school. But it was the only place, it was the first time in my life where the fact that I have all these fancy degrees, people were impressed because I was not from South Africa, because I was American, right? So I had higher status than all the other Black people and brown people in South Africa in terms of whites, right? So they gave me white privilege that I did not deserve, but I got it because I was American. So even though I was Black. So this may be hard for people to get their heads around, but that's the reality. That's every brown person and Black person but your own.
and that's such a huge part of why we want you on the podcast too.
To talk about these horrible things? Who else is going to talk about these horrible things, right?
At the same time, though, this is where I feel deeply uncomfortable talking about it because of all the things that you've listed.
Mm-hmm.
And also why I felt it important that Rae and Felice joined me, because they offer a point of view that I may not necessarily have.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Rae, how's been, you still have an accent, mm-hmm. right? And so how has it been navigating these spaces, which are pretty patriarchal,
Yeah.
right? And very white.
Yes.
And you're very small and you're very, very feminine with an accent.
Yeah.
So do you feel like people are listening to you, or do you have to crack a whip every time, or?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. And the cracking whip part has happened more as I have, I guess, like gotten a bit more older and a bit more worldly wise. And I've been like, yeah, I deserve to have my voice heard, because I feel like, so I initially moved to New Zealand 4 years ago. So I've been there. And then I've moved to Australia like earlier this year. So I feel like over the past 4 years, I've like slowly worked out my cultural shock and that imposter syndrome of, should I be here? There are like other people who are, as you said, but I took me a while to like wrap my head around the whole white privilege part of it. But now I'm like, yeah, I deserve to be heard. I am a global citizen. I deserve to have my voices and my experiences and expressions and everything out there. I deserve to be heard. So it's been a journey. I'm not going to lie. And still, like with my accent that you detected, I've had situations where I've talked to people, introduced myself, and they're like, oh, you're Indian. I never thought, like, you speak quite good English. So how has that happened? And I'm like, I went to a really good school and we were probably like penalized to speak in our regional tongue. So I've learned English the hard way. So I think for them, I think it's their way of telling me that I'm not, ethnic or anything. And they're trying to.
There's a word for this.
Yes.
There's a word. It was because we're talking about theories, right?
Uh-huh.
So there's a Black woman. I want to say her last name is Motse, Motse. And she has a saying, it's full blown. It's individualization to assimilation to whiteness, right? So individualization. So now I'm going to take you are a special Indian, right? But I'm still going to ignore all the other Indians. Mm-hmm. But you are different. And so I'm going to individualize you, individualization, to assimilation to whiteness. Now I'm going to bestow some whiteness on you because everybody's trying to be white, right? And so this is what it is. That's what they do. They're like, oh my God, you're so well spoken for an Indian, right? And therefore now they're going to treat you like you're fully human. Yes. To some extent, right? But they're still going to not do that to every other Indian. And that's her theory about it. It's also a subset of whiteness.
It is true, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually seen that happen here in Australia with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and certain programs that are all aimed at getting both high schoolers and adults into academia, into positions of high power as part of the reconciliation process, but also elevating their status. And I'm still incredibly new to all of this world, but there is part of it that's skeptical. And how much of that is how much of that actually replicates what has happened in the past, where we've tried to assimilate. I say we, my forefathers, previous generations to me, have tried to assimilate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders into the Australian landscape. And part of that is the stolen generation.
Which is so recent.
Incredibly recent.
Yes. So that's something I have learned things since I've been on this trip. I've been here for a month and a half. And when you talk about stolen generations, in the Americas, we're talking 1900, maybe up to the First World War. But the fact that it happened in the 1960s here?
1970s, even right up to early.
I was like, are you kidding me? I thought we're talking something in the past. But no, it's incredibly recent. In my lifetime, this has been happening to people. It's horrifying. So the fact, and I actually I'm often badly behaved. So I was badly behaved with a group of very well-meaning women, Australian women. And they were just like so frustrated and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, your optimism that basically a neo-Nazi regime would change in 20 years is really amazing. That you would think that in such a short time period that you could turn things around and turn a whole nation into being decent human beings, right? And I'm seeing this in South Africa as well. It's 30 years past the end of apartheid. And people smarter than me said, you could talk about changing people from one type of democratic system to another, but you're talking about a fascist neo-Nazi regime that was entrenched for 60 years and trying to change that in 30 years, it's really a hard ask, because those people who are enacting it are not dead and they're replicating themselves. So they, on the surface, may be good human beings, but they're side whispering, how they really hate these people and how they hate that people. And, I told you they're really stupid, or blah, 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 right? And so normal means is not a way of enacting. It's going to take longer. If you're going to have peaceful change, it's just going to take longer. And whatever argument you think you're making that's going to change, no. I mean, some people they're just never going to change. And that's, as a person who's an activist who is trying to change a whole discipline, which is astrophysics, I'm always trying to make them into decent human beings by beating them up, because arguments don't work, right? These people are so smart, so slippery, right? They can justify every decision. Oh, I'm not turning them down because they're Black. I'm turning them down because they didn't know the answer to this question, right? They will think of a question that can't be answered, right? And then, therefore, when they can't answer it, okay, we can kick them out of the pool, right? It's what I call intellectual racism, right? So you just cook up something, and because you don't want to share space with that person, or you don't think they're worthy of being there, or you just think they're intellectually inferior. I can't really imagine anyone who's intellectually inferior getting a doctorate in astrophysics. Once you have that doctorate, it says a whole lot. Even getting into graduate school in astrophysics they don't just hand out doctorates in astrophysics, but it's funny how they think that when it's a person of color who they don't have respect for, not the person, but the color, they will automatically put all kinds of fantasies in their heads about why this person happens to have a doctorate. And it couldn't ever be because they're smart, ever, or they're equal.
This ties to some of the ideas in science communication, actually, about trying to get people to change their minds through information and trying to create behavior change.
Yeah.
Which I find fascinating.
And difficult.
And difficult, indeed. One of the misconceptions I've come across with science communication is that it's going to change minds and therefore change behavior.
But there are people who are experts on behavioral change and corporate change and academic discipline changes, and they charge a lot of money to be consultants. So I have not seen them do it. I have not been on a workshop, but sometime in the next year or two, I will make sure that I am in the room when someone who's an expert on behavioral change is doing their thing.
Absolutely.
So, and then I can hire them to help me.
We've talked a lot about a lot of heavy topics today, and I appreciate you having the burden of that placed on you, which is unfair, quite frankly. But I do want to talk about your Senior Women in Astronomy Fellowship that has brought you to Perth and all your experiences that you've had here.
Yes, I've had a lot of really positive experiences. I've met some really nice people inside and outside of astrophysics. And it's been interesting going between the two nodes, because one is at Curtin and one is at University of Western Australia. So my first reshuffle of my brain is, when I had visited before, I had assumed that Curtin was the private elite university and UWA was the state and lower ranked university. And I had to be told that no, it's the other way around. That University of Western Australia is considered to be the best university in the Western
Australia University.
Yes. And I was like, oh, wow. And, but just, looking at the two campuses and dealing with the people, and I had gotten the impression that it was the other way around.
How interesting.
Yeah. But I'm willing to, shuffle my brain and and learn the rules. And so that was super interesting. So the type of things that I was suggesting for each one, because of course they always say they want to engage with, Indigenous people. And, and I'm like, no, do you like really Indigenous people, or what are we talking about here? Right. When I was talking to people in Curtin, I assumed they had a lot of money. And so I would give them money solutions, right? And there's things that they could just, buy their way in. And I was giving the wrong type of advice to the wrong node. I should have been speaking more at UWA about, things that require just more money, some thought and some lot of money to get these things going. So that was funny. It's funny on my part. So the other thing is I'm in Forest Hall.
Yeah.
Right. So, and Forest, there is definitely some issues with how they make money.
Yes.
And how they're trying to make good now, and they're philanthropic, and
there's definitely some history.
Big mining companies and et cetera, et cetera. But my philosophy has always been that people want to make amends, right? And that it's okay to take their money.
Yes.
Right. And because I'm the world's expert on African Indigenous astronomy, and I'm trying to transform astrophysics, right? That doesn't mean that I'm ignoring the fact that I'm using a facility set up by somebody who did extractive industries and possibly also somehow sabotaged the people, the Indigenous people whose land it was on. But they really should do more things for the Indigenous community on whose land they are mining, et cetera, but they don't know what to do. And so they should hire other people to do it. And I talked to, like I said, I met a lot of very smart women here, really smart women here. And I was like, so it would be awesome to get on the board of a foundation or a forest foundation or whatever, not the foundation, but the forest industries, and then just cause trouble. Like, you should be donating this to that, and you should be doing this to that, and keep pushing them until they kick you off, right? And so this, one of the very wise women is like, she's done this, and she's like, when you're on those boards and they make a donation, like, we're going to spend $1 million to get a new tractor or whatever, right? And then it's like, well, I want to start doing this community outreach stuff, and it takes 50,000. And it's like, 50,000? I don't know, it's like you just, dedicated $1 million to a tractor, and they like just getting small pots of money out of these people it's disgusting. And I was like, whoa, okay, I better rethink this. I better rethink my strategy of getting on boards and causing trouble, right?
It's actually an ongoing problem in the broader science communication, like every industry that you go into, they will spend lots of money on different things, but then outreach and science communication is...
They want to starve you.
Indeed.
Yeah. But they do realize that in order to continue functioning, the public has to be behind them, right? So this is how I feel being an astrophysicist. Nobody buys their own billion-dollar telescope. Nobody buys their own satellite. We are completely dependent on public funds. Therefore, we should be serving the public. Therefore, the public should be happy with us. If we're only educating white men, that is not the public. It is not. And in the US, they're not even the majority anymore, right? So we need to be serving our public, and we need to be thinking about what they want to see. They may not be happy with astrophysics as it is, but they'd like to see that the participation is across the board, that anyone has a right to become an astrophysicist, not just the geeky white men.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And on that, there will be a lot of geeky white men and beyond at Astrofest tomorrow night. Are you looking forward to participating in that tomorrow night?
I think the right answer is yes.
You can answer it. Oh, I could ask them differently if you want.
I cannot answer that question, honestly. All I can do is say yes. Mm-hmm. Have you done Astrofest before?
I have, actually. I've been involved in it in one way, shape or form, either as an attendee or volunteer since 2016.
Mm-hmm. And what's your favorite parts?
Oh, gosh. So depending on the weather that we get, you can have a complete cloud cover. You won't be able to look at any of the telescopes that are set up on the oval, but
so you like the telescope viewing?
I like the telescope viewing the best.
Yeah.
But also it's a chance to see where Space science is in Perth. It's very small, but it's very, very strong, and it's only going to get bigger with the SKA low being built in the Murchison region, which you visited yesterday.
Which I visited yesterday, yes. Yeah, and it was awesome. You from Geraldton, so
I am from Geraldton, yes.
yeah. So I got to walk the waterfront yesterday, and
well, growing up for me, that was an entire that was just a railway track. It's been redeveloped, and
it looks like it's been gentrified. But I have to say that there's lots of, as you're walking along that, this is more bad news. Just be ready, right? As I'm walking on the waterfront, there's various pictures of crowds and beachgoers, all white.
Yes.
I'm like, how the hell? How much effort do you have to make to turn these spaces to entirely white, right? When, the Indigenous people are just right there.
They are.
Yep. But you work so hard to make it all white and justify keeping it all white. And that's whiteness theory.
Yeah.
Back to that.
Back to that.
Back to that. Yes. We live it. We live it. It's around us all the time.
Indeed.
Yes. This is a great opportunity. I think I'll probably be the only cultural astronomer to take up this fellowship. And so my experience has to be different from everyone else because I'm far more focused on people and culture. And so I think the next person who's coming is just like another straight astrophysicist, and their experience will be different. So when I came, I had pretty much cleared my desk. So much of the time that I was here, I was working on things for here, like my next talk or the workshop. But when astrophysicists come, they're working on their next paper from there, the club. They're very, very distributed. They don't really have the luxury to focus on just what is it like to be in Perth and what are the people here like. So I imagine that the next ones will be different, right? More like the ones in the past where it's like, we're here, we want to collaborate, but its focus is on the computer and not necessarily on the larger culture that we're
and the people
moving around,
which
and
is
the people that make
cultural astronomy.
That's right. The people that make up the culture. And so it's been interesting. And the two nodes have different cultures.
Indeed.
As well.
So.
Yes. Yeah. And neither one of them is bad, but they are definitely different.
Definitely different. Indeed.
Yeah.
So.
And I see the difference also translated to the graduate students, right? So the graduate students in one place, I think, are more friendly than the ones in the other place. But the stress level seems to be low in both places. Like they don't feel like they're going mad and there's never enough time. But they are different, though. Like the way they behave, at least towards me, was different, depending on which node it was in. So it's all like all these little cultural nuances. But everything that I've just said, always take it with a grain of salt. I've only been here a month and a half.
At the same time, though, this is where cultural anthropology comes in. You, to an extent, do come in from an external point of view, and give your thoughts. And as someone who's lived here all their life, I find that fascinating.
So I'm not too long.
No.
Oh, that's good to know.
Quite on the mark, I'd say.
That's good to know.
Jarita, thank you so much for spending some time with us and for sharing your ideas and thoughts with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at thepsychomcollective.com. That's com with 2 M's. Questions or comments about today's episode? Get in touch on Instagram at The Psychom Collective. The Psychom Collective is supported by UWA's Grand Challenges Impact Grant.